Welcome to History with Herodotus, where we embark on a journey through the vast expanse of human experience, guided by the lantern of curiosity and the compass of wonder. Today, we find ourselves at the threshold of a pivotal moment in the annals of history, a moment that would shape the destiny of nations and redefine the fabric of international relations, the Peace of Westphalia. In the early 17th century, Europe was a tapestry woven from threads of conflict, with the 30 Years' War casting its long and ominous shadow across the continent. This war, a complex and multifaceted struggle that involved many of the major powers of Europe, including the Holy Roman Empire, Sweden, France, and Spain, had been raging since 1618, leaving in its wake a trail of devastation, death, and displacement. As we delve into the narrative of the Peace of Westphalia, let us begin by setting our gaze upon the Holy Roman Empire, that vast and sprawling entity that stretched from the snow-capped Alps to the shores of the Baltic Sea. It was here, within the empire's borders, that the seeds of conflict had been sown, as Protestantism and Catholicism clashed in a struggle that would eventually engulf the entire continent. The year 1618 marked a turning point, as the defenestration of Prague, a dramatic and symbolic event in which two imperial officials were hurled from a window, sparked the outbreak of war. The conflict quickly spread, drawing in other European powers, each with their own interests and agendas. The Swedish king, Gustavus Adolphus, a brilliant military strategist and a champion of Protestantism, would eventually join the fray, his armies marching across the empire like a force of nature, leaving devastation in their wake. Meanwhile, in France, Cardinal Richelieu, that cunning and masterful statesman, was carefully navigating the complex web of alliances and rivalries, seeking to advance the interests of his nation while containing the power of the Habsburgs. It was a delicate balancing act, one that required great skill and diplomacy, as Richelieu walked the tightrope between friendship and enmity, ever mindful of the shifting winds of war. As the conflict raged on, the empire itself began to fray, its institutions weakened by the relentless onslaught of war. The imperial diet, once a powerful symbol of unity and cooperation, was now mired in gridlock and factionalism, unable to respond effectively to the crisis. It was against this backdrop of chaos and disorder that the idea of a peace conference began to take shape, a gathering of nations that would seek to bring an end to the war and establish a new order in Europe. The city of Munster, with its picturesque streets and bustling marketplaces, would eventually become the focal point of these efforts as diplomats and negotiators from across Europe converged upon this charming Westphalian town. It was here, in the midst of war and devastation, that the foundations of a new era of international relations would be laid, an era marked by the principles of sovereignty, non-interference, and the balance of power. As the diplomats and negotiators converged upon Munster, the city became a hub of intense diplomatic activity, with representatives from over 100 states and territories gathering to hammer out the terms of a peace treaty. The Swedish delegation, led by Count Johan Oxenstierna, arrived in Munster on April 1643, followed closely by the French delegation, headed by Claude de Mesmes, Comte de Vaux. The Holy Roman Empire, represented by Count Maximilian von Trautmannsdorf, was also present, as were numerous other states and principalities. The negotiations were complex and often contentious, with each side seeking to advance its own interests while minimizing concessions to others. One of the most significant challenges facing the negotiators was the issue of sovereignty, as the concept of state sovereignty was still in its infancy. The Peace of Westphalia would ultimately enshrine the principle of sovereignty, recognizing the authority of states to govern their own territories and affairs without external interference. A pivotal moment in the negotiations came on December 24, 1644, when the Swedish and French delegations presented a joint proposal for a comprehensive peace settlement. This proposal, known as the Christmas Proposal, called for an end to hostilities, recognition of the independence of Switzerland and the Netherlands, and a redistribution of territories within the Holy Roman Empire. The imperial delegation, however, was reluctant to accept these terms, and the negotiations continued to drag on. As the months passed, the city of Munster became a microcosm of the larger conflict, with diplomats and soldiers, merchants and clergy, all rubbing shoulders in the crowded streets and taverns. It was here, in the midst of this vibrant and cosmopolitan atmosphere, that the famous phrase, cuius regio, ius religio, whose region, his religion, began to take shape as a guiding principle of the peace negotiations. This concept, which held that the ruler of a territory had the right to determine its official religion, would have far-reaching consequences for the future of Europe. In the spring of 1645, a breakthrough in the negotiations occurred, when the imperial delegation agreed to recognize the independence of Switzerland and the Netherlands. This concession marked a significant turning point in the talks, as it paved the way for further agreements on territorial adjustments and security guarantees. On July 14, 1646, the Swedish and French delegations signed a preliminary treaty with the Holy Roman Empire, which established the basis for a comprehensive peace settlement. The final months of the negotiations were marked by intense wrangling over details, as each side sought to secure the best possible terms. The city of Osnabrück, which had been designated as a secondary negotiating site, played host to a series of grueling sessions between the imperial and Swedish delegations. It was here, on October 24, 1648, that the Treaty of Westphalia was finally signed, bringing an end to the 30 Years' War and establishing a new order in Europe. As the ink dried on the Treaty of Westphalia, the city of Munster erupted in celebration, with diplomats and locals alike gathering to mark the end of a devastating conflict that had ravaged Europe for 3 decades. The treaty, signed on October 24, 1648, brought an end to the 30 Years' War, establishing a new order in Europe based on the principles of sovereignty, non-interference, and the balance of power. In the years that followed, the Treaty of Westphalia would be ratified by over 100 states and territories, cementing its place as a foundational document of modern international relations. One of the key consequences of the Peace of Westphalia was the recognition of the independence of Switzerland and the Netherlands, marking a significant shift in the balance of power in Europe. As the German philosopher and historian Leibniz would later remark, the Peace of Westphalia was a great revolution in the affairs of Europe, for it introduced a new system of public law based on the principle of the equality and independence of states. This concept of state sovereignty would have far-reaching implications, shaping the course of European history for centuries to come. In the decades that followed, the Peace of Westphalia would face numerous challenges as European powers sought to test its limits and exploit its ambiguities. The treaty's emphasis on non-interference, for example, would be repeatedly violated by powerful states seeking to expand their territories or impose their will on weaker neighbors. Nevertheless, the principles enshrined in the Treaty of Westphalia would endure, providing a framework for international relations that would shape the course of modern history. Today, the Peace of Westphalia is remembered as a landmark moment in the development of modern international relations, marking the transition from a medieval world of fragmented authority and overlapping jurisdictions to a modern system of sovereign states. As historians and scholars continue to study and debate the treaty's significance, its legacy can be seen in the modern nation-state system, with its emphasis on sovereignty, territorial integrity, and non-interference. The Peace of Westphalia may have been a product of its time, but its impact continues to reverberate through the ages, shaping our understanding of international relations and the global order. That's all for today's History with Herodotus. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, remember that, to understand the present, we must first understand the past.